How John D. Rockefeller became wealthy. How he built his trillion-dollar oil empire. Before Bezos had rockets, before Musk had Mars, and long before Gates had Windows, there was a man who didn't just build a company. He built an industry. His name? John D. Rockefeller. And if you think today's billionaires are rich, wait till you hear about the guy who made so much money, the government had to invent laws just to slow him down. But how did a boy from a chaotic household in upstate New York, whose father sold snake oil and brought his mistress home to dinner, rise to become the wealthiest man in modern history? Why did he choose refining over drilling, and what secrets did he use to crush 90% of his competition? What kind of mind sees waste and turns it into wealth, sees rivals and turns them into employees? And here's the kicker. When the U.S. Supreme Court finally broke up his empire, did Rockefeller cry into his kerosene-soaked pillow? Nope. He got richer. Because when you play chess with capitalism, Rockefeller doesn't just checkmate. He flips the board and sells it back to you. So buckle up, because this isn't just a story about oil. It's a story about ambition, scandal, strategy, and the man who rewrote the rules of wealth before anyone else even knew there was a game. Stay tuned till the end. You'll never look at a gas station the same way again. In the summer of 1839, in the quiet town of Richford, New York, a boy was born who would one day become the most powerful businessman the world had ever seen. His name? John Davison Rockefeller. But if you'd peeked into his childhood home, you'd never guess the empire that awaited him. His father, William Big Bill Rockefeller, was a traveling salesman with the charm of a carnival barker and the morals of a raccoon in a henhouse. He called himself a botanic physician, which was 19th century slang for I sell fake medicine and disappear for weeks. Big Bill had a habit of fathering children with other women and, brace yourself, bringing one of those women home to live with his actual wife, Eliza. The Rockefeller household was less Little House on the Prairie and more Real Housewives of upstate New York. Amid this chaos, young John learned two things early: how to stretch a penny until it screamed, and how to negotiate like his life depended on it. He raised turkeys, sold candy, and did odd jobs for neighbors. Every cent was recorded in a little ledger. He was a boy with the soul of an accountant and the ambition of a conqueror. When the family moved to Cleveland, Ohio in 1854, John finally got a taste of formal education, but it didn't last long. At 16, he dropped out to work as a bookkeeper for Hewitt and Tuttle, earning a princely sum of $1.50 a day. He celebrated the day he got the job as Job Day for the rest of his life. But when his bosses refused to give him a raise after 2 years, John did what any future oil tycoon would do. He started his own business. With a $4,000 loan, a fortune at the time, he launched a produce brokerage with partner Maurice B. Clark. Their first year brought in $500,000 in sales, and John's reputation soared. Banks lined up to lend him money. He was just 18 years old, and already Cleveland's most promising young businessman. The year was 1859, and the sleepy town of Titusville, Pennsylvania, was about to become the epicenter of one of the most explosive economic booms in American history, literally and figuratively. 100 miles east of Cleveland, a man named Edwin Drake struck oil, and suddenly the ground beneath Pennsylvania wasn't just dirt, it was liquid gold. The black gold rush had begun, and every man with a shovel, a barrel, and a dream was scrambling to drill. But while the masses were busy playing Texas Hold'em with dynamite, one man in Cleveland was watching with the quiet intensity of a chess master. John D. Rockefeller, already a sharp young businessman with a nose for opportunity and a ledger that could make a banker weep with joy, saw something others didn't. Drilling was a gamble. You could spend a fortune and hit nothing but mud. But refining? That was the real game. It was predictable, scalable, and if done right, utterly conquerable. Now, Rockefeller wasn't just sitting on his hands waiting for fate to deliver. He was preparing. And in 1863, the stars aligned. The government finally completed a rail line connecting the Pennsylvania oil fields to Cleveland. And while other oil men were still figuring out how to roll barrels down muddy hills, John was already at the station with a battalion of bankers, a war chest of capital, and a dream so big it needed its own zip code. But John wasn't going to do this alone. He partnered with Samuel Andrews, a chemist who could turn crude oil into kerosene with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Together with Maurice B. Clark, they formed Andrews, Clark & Co. and began refining oil in Cleveland. But John, ever the tactician, soon bought out Clark's share and rebranded the firm as Rockefeller and Andrews. It was the beginning of something colossal. While other refineries were operating at a clunky 60% efficiency, John's team of engineers and chemical wizards were cooking up something revolutionary. They didn't just refine oil, they reinvented the process. They squeezed every drop of value out of every barrel like it owed them rent. And here's where Rockefeller's genius truly shined. He sold the waste. Yes, while others were dumping byproducts into rivers or burning them off like unwanted calories, John was bottling them up and selling them. Paraffin wax became candles for America's homes. Tar paved the roads that would one day carry his oil. Naphtha powered industrial machines. It was like watching someone turn potato peels into Michelin-star cuisine. By 1865, his refinery was worth over $70,000, a staggering sum at the time, and one of the largest in Cleveland. But John wasn't interested in being one of the largest. He wanted to be the only one. At that time, Cleveland had 26 competing refineries. Within 5 years, John had acquired all but 4. How? With charm, cunning, and cold, hard numbers. He'd invite competitors over, pour them a cup of tea, and casually show them his books. "See here," he'd say, "I can operate at a loss longer than you can stay solvent." It wasn't a threat, it was a fact. And then came the sweetener. He'd offer them a generous buyout and a cushy job in his company. Many accepted. After all, why fight the tide when you can ride the wave? By 1870, the business was too big for a partnership, so John incorporated as Standard Oil of Ohio. It was no longer just a company, it was a machine. And the machine was hungry. To crush the remaining holdouts, John slashed prices, sometimes by 80%, making it impossible for smaller refineries to compete. It was economic warfare, and John was Napoleon with a calculator. By 1880, he had expanded across the northeastern U.S., refining over 90% of the country's oil. He was so powerful, he didn't just negotiate with railroads. He summoned their owners like a medieval king and demanded rebates. Secret deals, preferential rates, and exclusive contracts became the norm. Naturally, this didn't sit well with other industrialists. They feared Rockefeller's grip on transportation could lead to monopolies in their own industries. The media pounced. Politicians sharpened their pens. Ohio legislators began drafting antitrust laws to take him down. But John was always one move ahead. In 1882, he reincorporated in New Jersey, creating the Standard Oil Trust, a legal hydra that held stakes in over 40 companies. It was a corporate labyrinth so complex, even Sherlock Holmes would have needed a spreadsheet. To flaunt his success, John built a grand headquarters on Broadway, a monument to capitalism that screamed, "I own everything, and I'm not sorry." By the turn of the 20th century, John D. Rockefeller wasn't just rich. He was Richie Rich meets Thanos. His company, Standard Oil, had ballooned into a behemoth that owned 20,000 oil wells, 4,000 miles of pipeline, and employed over 100,000 people. If oil was the bloodstream of industrial America, Rockefeller was the heart pumping it with ruthless precision. But the world was changing. Far across the Atlantic, the Rothschild family, yes, those Rothschilds, were developing massive oil fields in Russia and Asia, and they weren't just playing catch-up. They were gunning for Rockefeller's crown. The global oil chessboard was expanding, and the Rothschilds were moving their pawns with aristocratic flair. Back in America, Rockefeller's grip on the oil industry was so tight it made other industrialists sweat bullets. His secret railroad rebates, his price-slashing tactics, and his habit of swallowing competitors whole had turned him into a corporate boogeyman. And then came the reckoning. Enter Ida Tarbell, the daughter of a man whose business had been crushed under the boot of Standard Oil. In 1904, she published The History of the Standard Oil Company, a journalistic flamethrower that exposed Rockefeller's tactics with surgical precision. She didn't just write a book, she launched a crusade. Her exposé painted Rockefeller as a cold, calculating monopolist who treated competition like a disease to be eradicated. Public opinion turned, politicians sharpened their pens, and the government finally dusted off its legal arsenal. the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. It had been sitting on the shelf like an old sword, waiting for a worthy dragon. But Standard Oil's corporate structure was so convoluted, like a financial spaghetti bowl, it took 21 years to unravel. Then came 1911. The U.S. Supreme Court, in a landmark decision, ruled that Standard Oil was guilty of anti-competitive practices and ordered it to be broken up into 34 separate companies. Among them, names that would become titans in their own right: Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and more. Now here's the twist. So delicious it deserves its own theme music. The breakup made Rockefeller even richer. You see, John had kept his stakes in all the successor companies, and when they were spun off, their stock values exploded like a barrel of crude in a bonfire. By 1913, Rockefeller's net worth was estimated at $900 million, nearly 3% of the entire U.S. GDP. Adjusted for inflation, that's a jaw-dropping $400 billion, a figure that makes Bezos, Musk, and Gates look like they're still saving up for their first yacht. After decades of dominating the oil industry like a Monopoly board villain with hotels on every square, John D. Rockefeller did something unexpected. He stepped back. Not because he was tired, he was still sharp as a tack, but because he had already won. The empire was built, the rivals were vanquished, and the dividends were flowing like crude through a pipeline. So what does a man with more money than some countries do in retirement? He gives it away. But not in the "here's a check, good luck" kind of way. No, Rockefeller turned philanthropy into a science. He didn't just donate, he engineered generosity. First up, the University of Chicago, founded in 1890. Rockefeller poured millions into it, transforming a modest Midwestern school into a world-class institution. It wasn't just about buildings and books, it was about creating a powerhouse of research and education that could rival the Ivy League. And it did. Then came Rockefeller University, a research institution that focused on biomedical science before most people could even spell microbiology. It became a hub for breakthroughs in medicine, attracting Nobel laureates like moths to a flame. And then, the crown jewel, the Rockefeller Foundation, established in 1913. With a war chest of over $500 million, a staggering sum at the time, the foundation tackled global health, education, and scientific advancement. One of its most famous victories? Eradicating hookworm in the American South, a parasite so common it was practically a regional mascot. Thanks to Rockefeller's funding, millions were treated, and public health took a quantum leap forward. But this wasn't just charity, it was legacy building. Rockefeller believed that wealth came with responsibility, and he wanted to be remembered not just as the oil king, but as a force for good. He once said, "The best philanthropy is constantly in search of the finalities, a search for a cause, an attempt to cure evils at their source." That's not just a quote, it's a mission statement. And so the man who had once been vilified by journalists, investigated by Congress, and broken up by the Supreme Court became one of the most influential philanthropists in history. His money didn't just build institutions, it built ideas, movements, and solutions. On May 23, 1937, at the age of 97, John D. Rockefeller passed away. He had lived long enough to see his empire dismantled, his fortune immortalized, and his legacy cemented as the wealthiest man in modern history. Not bad for a kid who once sold turkeys to help his mother make ends meet. So next time you hear about tech billionaires launching rockets or building AI empires, remember, Rockefeller didn't just build a company, he built an industry. He rewrote the rules of capitalism, turned waste into wealth, and played the game so well, he didn't just win, he owned the board. And if you've enjoyed this wild ride through the oil-soaked corridors of ambition, scandal, and empire, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Because history isn't just about dusty dates and forgotten names, it's about the people who dared to shape the future with vision, grit, and a whole lot of kerosene.